Hello, my name is Kia West and I'm a current student with Federation Australia. This video reflection is relating to week one's learning with theories and models for practice, and I am titling it When Theory Meets Lived Experience. So this week our learning was all about an introduction to theory, and part of my reflective practice that I have embedded into my learning, I was really curious about what gaps might emerge between theory and practice. I wanted to, before I go further, just kind of put a little option to continue. I do discuss domestic violence in this video. As a theory, we're not going into any deep dive or of specifics that may be triggering, but I did want to give you the opportunity to decide if you feel safe to continue to listen to this video. So, as I said, this video reflection draws on my lived experience and is spoken at a level that is broader themes rather than specifics. So I have experienced having to escape violence a number of times, and my experience and how it showed up in the learnings this week was that there absolutely is a gap between theory and practice. So what I found personally was that crisis intervention was quite comprehensive. It was overwhelming, but there was a lot of support. I was given temporary safe accommodation for 6 weeks. I was engaged in daily group therapy. I had a social worker who was supporting me to kind of build strength, confidence, and practical next steps. But after leaving this crisis intervention, I was then kind of left out in the woods and resources weren't as accessible. I wasn't really sure where to go from there, and naturally the change that I had experienced inside of the crisis intervention kind of fell away. So it didn't hold. That pattern of change did not hold. Something that I also acknowledged and observed in this experience with domestic violence is that there is a real heavy amount of support for the women and children, especially when it comes to escaping, but there's no support for men. And I was really curious about that. I've been curious about that for a long time. I've always advocated for men. It makes sense to me to advocate for men, especially when, there's minimal resources to support change in men, and I just didn't understand that. And so I have used my learning experience this week to kind of get a bit clearer about why that is, and see if I can conjure up some questions that we as a learning community, but the broader community also might be able to start to consider. And it's important to me because I have 5 children. I have 3 sons. I have 2 daughters. My sons, because of their experience and their exposure, are vulnerable of perpetuating the same cycle, and the current system doesn't protect them in the long run. My daughters, because of their exposure, are vulnerable to seek the same sort of unhealthy relational dynamics that they had modeled to them by their fathers and I, and that is problematic for me as well. And what makes sense to me is if there was a way to support men, then that can solve a lot more of the bigger problems. It was very interesting as part of my reflections this week to sort of look at the micro and macro lenses to that, and it was also interesting to explore it through the integrative lenses, because there are some contradictions if we were to apply some kind of strategy or resource to be able to resource men. There are, through some of these lenses, I can see why they wouldn't work and how they can perpetuate harm. So what I found really interesting, for example, is the relational lens. If we are constantly over-empathizing, I suppose, with someone who has caused harm, we are not giving them the opportunity to recognize the harmful behaviors that may need to change. It could just buffer or cushion any opportunity for learning through this lens too much. It also runs a very high risk of causing harm to people who have already been hurt by potential people who have caused harm. So there was that element where the relational lens may not be a great fit. Social justice lens may come in too hard. It may risk someone who has caused harm to shut down and not engage. If they are being met too abrasively, which the social justice lens may kind of imply, it's not going to be effective. I do see some promise with a reflective lens, but I think that is something that would need a significant amount of education. And then the change lens, I don't know how to bridge that from theory to practice. In theory, we can be working towards trying to find ways to create change, but I don't know where we're at in terms of the practice. So it was just looking at those lenses alone with my lived experience, the theories, where these gaps are, was very interesting. Something that I also sat with this week in terms of kind of giving it this week's learning a actual theme to sort of apply and run with, was with the perpetrator support gap. What came up was, and what has been theorized, is that real change takes quite a long time. There are a number of different approaches: the psychodynamic approach, cognitive behavioral therapy. There's a number of different approaches to rehabilitation available that maybe aren't as concentrated on in practice, because they are long and costly. We're talking about years of work, and there's a financial cost to that and a time integration period for that. So typically what is provided in terms of resources for men who cause harm are anger management courses and really small 6 to 8 week programs, and that's not cutting it. I don't think the evidence has shown it doesn't work. So that's a huge gap for me. I'm really curious about what we can do to bridge that gap. There's something really rich in this for me. I think it's part of my own healing journey, but also to bring change in the long run. I would really love to have some of these gaps closed so that all 5 of my children get to experience loving, reciprocal, healthy relationships when they are older, and not have to live through this really entrenched systemic fracture that we have currently in the status quo. And I think for me, there's some response to that, or some space for us to move towards change, is actually by supporting and finding the right targeted resources to make change within men more effective, whilst still providing the same intervention supports for women. I also believe that there is space for change and growth in how women and families are supported. It's really hard in a refuge. It is really hard having to kind of rebuild multiple times. And I think they have a long way to go. Now, I have included in the video description for this some resources that may have been supported. If this brings up anything for you, please know that there are crisis intervention lines that can be accessed. They have helped me a number of times. Anytime I come across people, whether they're a stranger or someone who I know who is feeling any sort of distress to what is happening in their world or the circumstances in and around their world, I have advocated and will continue to advocate to contact any one of these crisis lines that might feel appropriate for you. They are really, really, really good at helping you to just even be a sounding board. That's a lot of the times that's what they've been for me, is a safe space to offload, share my fears. They can often redirect to more useful resources. So please, if anything I have shared has caused any discomfort, know that there are people that you can contact right away to support you. More than that though, I hope that you are also interested in considering and getting curious about how we can be more effective in change, especially when it comes to domestic violence in our communities. And I hope that out of this reflection, you may take the time, a moment or two, to consider some questions of your own. What have you experienced? How do you think we could solve this? Even if it is huge and lofty, I think it's really encouraging to be able to imagine, if we had a magic wand, how could we solve these really deep, complex situations that our culture is currently experiencing. And if you would like to share them, you are more than welcome to. I am very grateful to be in this space of learning. I am very excited to keep wading in amongst the gaps to see where my creative and my creative brain and my lived experience can combine to potentially plant some seeds for change. And yeah, thank you for listening. I imagine this has gone a little longer than I had anticipated, but I am very grateful for this space of reflection. It felt a lot more integrative to share it in this delivery instead of just a written format. This one was kind of really alive in me to give a voice to it, even if it is a little unpolished and unrefined. That is okay. But yeah, hopefully you have at least taken some questions to reflect on away from this reflection. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one.